was 1:47 in the morning when Ethan realized someone was standing outside his bedroom. He couldn't see anyone. There were no footsteps. There was only the sound of slow breathing coming from the hallway. Ethan sat completely still on his bed. He looked at the cheap digital clock on his desk. 1:47 a.m. His small room was almost completely dark. Only a weak lamp beside his bed was still on. Outside the window, cold wind moved through the trees. Ethan stared at his bedroom door. Someone was on the other side, but he had no idea who. And the worst part was, everyone else in the house was supposed to be asleep. Ethan was 21 years old. He was studying at a community college in Oregon. He wasn't from a wealthy family. His mother lived several states away, and his father hadn't been part of his life for years. So Ethan had learned to manage everything himself. Tuition, food, books, rent, transportation. Nothing came easily. During the day, he attended classes. In the evening, he worked part-time at a grocery store in a small town outside Portland. He usually finished his shift late at night. For transportation, Ethan had an old, second-hand motorcycle. It wasn't anything special. The paint was faded. The seat had a small tear. Sometimes the engine took several attempts to start. But Ethan had bought it cheaply from a local mechanic because he couldn't afford a newer vehicle. For him, that motorcycle wasn't a luxury. It was the only reason he could get to work. The house where Ethan lived was about 20 minutes outside town. It was an old rental property surrounded by tall trees. Only a few houses were nearby. The road became almost completely empty after midnight. There were no stores within walking distance, no busy streets, no city lights, just trees, darkness, and the occasional sound of a passing vehicle. Ethan rented one small bedroom in the house and shared the rest of the place with two other tenants. His room was tiny. A single bed, a second-hand desk, an old dresser, one window, and a closet that never seemed to close properly. But the rent was low. That was enough for Ethan. He didn't need anything more. At least, that's what he used to think. About 2 weeks after moving in, Ethan came home from work around midnight. He parked his motorcycle beside the house. As he walked toward the front door, he noticed something strange. The door was slightly open. Ethan stopped. He clearly remembered closing it before leaving. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The house was dark. "Ethan?" One of his roommates called from upstairs. Ethan looked up. "Yeah? Everything okay?" "Yeah, I thought I locked the door before I left." His roommate didn't say anything. Ethan closed the door and checked the lock. It worked perfectly. He stood there for a moment. Maybe he had simply forgotten. He was tired. He'd been working long hours. So he decided not to think about it. A few days later, something else happened. Ethan was studying alone in his bedroom. His laptop was open on the desk. Books were scattered everywhere. He had an exam coming up, and he was already behind. The room was quiet. Then he noticed the closet. The door was open. Ethan stared at it. He remembered closing it before sitting down. He got up and walked over. Inside were his clothes, an old backpack, and several cardboard boxes. Nothing unusual. He closed the closet. Then he returned to his desk. About 10 minutes later, he heard a faint movement behind him. Ethan turned around. The closet door was open again. He didn't move. For several seconds, he simply stared at it. Then he walked over and checked inside. Nothing. He closed it again. This time, he pushed his desk chair in front of the door. He went back to studying. He never told his roommates. He didn't want them to think he was imagining things. Life continued. Classes, work, bills, sleep, repeat. Ethan tried to ignore the strange things happening around him. He had enough problems already. One evening, after finishing his shift, he left the grocery store around midnight. The parking lot was almost empty. He put on his helmet, started his old motorcycle, and began riding toward home. The road outside town was dark. His headlight illuminated only a small section of the road ahead. Tall trees surrounded both sides. There was almost no traffic. As Ethan passed a wooded area, he suddenly thought he saw someone standing near the trees. A person, completely still. Ethan slowed down. The figure wasn't there anymore. He looked around. Nothing. He continued riding. He told himself it had probably been a tree or a sign. Maybe he was just tired. But when he reached the house, he noticed the porch light was on. He hadn't left it on. Inside, everything seemed normal. His roommates were asleep. The kitchen was empty. Ethan quietly went into his bedroom. He changed his clothes and sat on his bed. He opened his laptop. He tried to study, but his mind kept returning to the figure beside the road. Eventually, he checked his phone. 12:58 a.m. He decided to sleep. He turned off the lamp. The room became dark. Ethan pulled the blanket over himself and closed his eyes. For several minutes, everything was quiet. Then he heard something from downstairs, a faint sound. Ethan opened his eyes. He listened. Nothing. He closed his eyes again. A few moments later, he heard movement in the hallway. Someone was walking slowly. Ethan sat up. The sound stopped. He waited. Then the floor creaked near his bedroom. His heart started beating faster. "Jake?" No answer. Ethan reached for his phone. He turned on the flashlight. The beam pointed toward the bedroom door. Nothing moved. Then his phone vibrated. It was Marcus. "You still awake?" Ethan replied, "Yeah." Marcus wrote, "You should sleep." Ethan smiled slightly. Trying. He put the phone down. Then he looked at the screen again. The time had changed. 1:47 a.m. At that exact moment, the breathing started. Ethan froze. Someone was outside his bedroom. He could hear slow breathing through the closed door. He didn't move. He didn't even want to make a sound. The breathing continued for a few seconds. Then it stopped. Silence. Ethan slowly picked up his phone. He texted Marcus. "Is anyone at the house?" Marcus replied, "No, why?" Ethan stared at the screen. He typed, "I think someone is outside my room." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Then his message appeared. "Check the front door." Ethan didn't want to leave his room, but he slowly stood up. He walked toward the door. His hand moved toward the handle. Before he could touch it, a woman's voice came from the hallway. "Ethan?" He stopped. His entire body went cold. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but he had never heard it before. Ethan stepped away from the door. The voice came from farther down the hallway. "Ethan?" He didn't answer. Silence filled the house. Then the door handle slowly moved. Ethan stared at it. His breathing became faster. The handle stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened slightly by itself. A thin gap appeared. Ethan raised his phone and pointed the flashlight through it. The hallway was empty. But at the far end, there was a dark figure. It looked like a person, tall, motionless. Ethan blinked. The figure disappeared. He immediately locked his bedroom door. He stayed awake until morning. When sunlight finally entered the room, Ethan opened the door. He looked down. There were wet footprints on the floor. They started somewhere near the entrance. They continued through the hallway and stopped directly outside his bedroom. Ethan slowly followed them with his eyes. He looked toward the front entrance. The door was still locked from the inside. He stood there, completely confused. Then he noticed something else. The footprints didn't continue into his room. They ended right at his door, as if whoever had made them had been standing there, watching him sleep.
Ethan slowly looked toward the closet. The chair he had placed there the night before was lying on the floor, and the closet door was open. Inside the darkness, something was hanging from the ceiling. Ethan took one step closer. It was an old woman's coat. He had never seen it before, but there was something about it that made his stomach turn. Because the coat looked exactly like the one worn by a woman in an old photograph hanging in the hallway. A woman whose name Ethan had never heard before. He walked closer to the photograph. Underneath it was a small brass nameplate, Margaret Hill. Ethan stared at the photograph. Then he looked back toward the closet. The coat was gone, and suddenly, he heard a woman's voice directly behind him. "Ethan?" He turned around. Nobody was there, but the bedroom door was slowly closing by itself. The Door at 1:47 a.m. Part 1. Ethan stood completely still. The bedroom door was slowly closing behind him. He didn't touch it. He didn't move toward it. He simply watched. The door came to a stop. Ethan looked at the photograph on the wall again. Margaret Hill. He had never heard that name before, but the old coat in his closet, the photograph, and the woman's voice, they couldn't all be coincidences. Ethan grabbed his phone and took a picture of the photograph. Then he searched the name online. At first, nothing useful appeared. Then he found an old local newspaper article. The article was dated 1998. Ethan began reading. Margaret Hill had lived in the same house. She had disappeared one winter night. There were no signs of forced entry. Her car was still outside. Her purse was inside the house. Her keys were on the kitchen counter. But Margaret herself was never found. Ethan stared at the screen. He checked the address. His stomach tightened. It was the exact address of his house. Ethan immediately went downstairs. His roommate, Jake, was making coffee in the kitchen. "Ethan?" Ethan put his phone on the counter. "Do you know who Margaret Hill was?" Jake stopped. The color slowly disappeared from his face. "Where did you hear that name?" "There's a photograph upstairs." Jake looked toward the staircase. "What photograph?" "The one in the hallway." Jake didn't answer. Ethan stared at him. "Jake?" Jake finally spoke. "That picture has been there since before I moved in." "Who was she?" Jake shook his head. "I don't know." Ethan looked at him carefully. "You've never heard the story?" Jake hesitated. Then he said, "People around here know something happened in this house." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What happened?" Jake lowered his voice. "Nobody really knows." That afternoon, Ethan went to the local library. He searched through old newspaper archives. After almost an hour, he found another article. This one had more information. Margaret had disappeared on a cold December night.
The police had searched the property. They checked the woods. They searched nearby roads. They even brought dogs. Nothing was found. But one detail stood out. A neighbor had reported seeing a woman standing outside Margaret's bedroom window around 1:47 a.m. The witness believed it was Margaret, but when police arrived later, the woman was gone. Ethan stopped reading. 1:47 a.m. His hands became cold. That was the exact time he had heard the breathing, the exact time the voice had called his name. He closed the newspaper archive. He didn't want to read anymore. That evening, Ethan didn't go straight home. He sat outside the grocery store on his motorcycle for almost 20 minutes. He kept thinking about leaving the house. Maybe he could sleep at Marcus's place. Maybe he could find another rental, but he couldn't afford to lose his deposit. He also couldn't afford a hotel. His bank account had barely enough money to cover the next week's expenses. So eventually, he went home. The house looked completely normal. The porch light was off. The windows were dark. Nothing seemed unusual. Ethan parked his motorcycle and walked inside. Jake was in the living room. "You're late." "Yeah." Jake looked at him. "You okay?" Ethan nodded. "Just tired." He didn't tell Jake about the newspaper article. He wasn't ready. That night, Ethan kept his bedroom light on. He placed his phone beside him. He also kept his motorcycle keys in his pocket. He didn't know why. Maybe because knowing he could leave at any moment made him feel safer. He sat on his bed and studied. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Eventually, Ethan checked the time. 1:31 a.m. He closed his laptop. He was exhausted. Then the bedroom light flickered. Ethan looked up. The light stabilized. He waited. Nothing. He turned toward the closet. The door was closed. The chair was still in front of it. Everything looked normal. Then Ethan heard something. A faint scratching sound coming from inside the closet. He stopped breathing. The sound continued for a few seconds, then disappeared. Ethan stood up. He didn't want to open it, but something inside him told him he had to. He moved the chair. His hand reached for the closet handle. He opened the door. Nothing was inside, just clothes, boxes, darkness. Ethan sighed. Then he noticed something on the floor, a small envelope. He picked it up. There was no name on it. He opened it. Inside was an old photograph. It showed the house, the same house, but the photograph looked decades old. Ethan turned it over. There was handwriting on the back. One sentence. She never left. Ethan's hands started shaking. He immediately searched for the photograph online. It looked like the same house from the newspaper articles, but something didn't make sense. The photograph had been taken from inside the house. Someone had been standing in the upstairs hallway when the picture was taken. At the end of the hallway, there was a woman. She was facing the camera. Her face was difficult to see, but Ethan recognized the coat. The same gray coat, the one he had seen hanging inside his closet that morning.
Ethan dropped the phone. A cold breeze moved through the room. The bedroom window was closed. He slowly turned toward it. There was a faint reflection in the glass. Someone was standing behind him. Ethan turned around. Nobody. He looked back at the window. The reflection was still there. A woman, standing directly behind him. Ethan didn't move. Then the reflection slowly raised its hand. Ethan turned around again. Nothing. His phone suddenly rang. Marcus. Ethan answered immediately. "Marcus?" Marcus didn't speak.
Ethan?
Nothing. Then Ethan heard breathing through the phone. Slow, quiet, close. He pulled the phone away from his ear.
Marcus, are you there?
A woman's voice answered.
He's not there.
Ethan's blood ran cold. The call ended. Ethan grabbed his motorcycle keys. He opened his bedroom door and rushed toward the stairs. But when he reached the hallway, he stopped. The hallway looked different. The lights were off. The air felt unusually cold. At the end of the hallway stood the woman. The same coat, the same shape from the photograph. Ethan couldn't see her face. She didn't move. Ethan took a step backward. The woman slowly raised her head. Ethan felt his legs weaken. Then he heard her whisper, "You shouldn't have looked for me." Ethan ran. He rushed downstairs. He grabbed the front door handle. It wouldn't move. He tried again. Nothing. The door was locked. Ethan looked back toward the stairs. The hallway was empty. The woman was gone. Then he heard a sound behind him. The sound came from the kitchen. Ethan slowly turned. The kitchen door was open. Inside, someone was standing in the darkness. Ethan couldn't see the face. He stepped backward. Then the lights suddenly turned on. The kitchen was empty. Ethan ran back upstairs. He grabbed his phone. He called the police. But before the call connected, his phone screen went black. The battery had been at 60%. Now it showed nothing. Ethan stared at it. Then he heard footsteps coming from his bedroom, slowly approaching the hallway. He didn't want to look, but he did. His bedroom door was open. The room was dark. And inside the darkness, the old photograph was lying on his bed. Ethan walked closer. The photograph had changed. The woman was no longer standing at the end of the hallway. She was standing directly in front of Ethan's bedroom. And behind her was Ethan. But the photograph showed him standing inside the room, looking terrified. Ethan dropped it. Then he heard his own voice, coming from inside the bedroom. "Don't turn around." Ethan froze. His eyes filled with fear. He slowly looked at the floor. A shadow appeared behind him, but there was no person standing there. The shadow moved closer. Ethan couldn't breathe. Then the woman's voice came from directly beside his ear. "You live here now." The lights went out. Everything became completely dark. The next morning, Jake woke up and noticed Ethan's motorcycle was still outside. He knocked on Ethan's bedroom door. "Ethan?" No answer. He opened the door. The room was empty. Ethan was gone. His phone was lying on the floor. His backpack was still there. His wallet was still on the desk. His motorcycle keys were beside the bed. But Ethan himself was nowhere in the house. Jake called the police. They searched the property. They searched the woods. They checked the road. Nothing. There was no sign of Ethan. Weeks passed, then months. Eventually, people stopped talking about him. But one night, almost a year later, a new tenant moved into the house. A young college student. He rented the same bedroom. He placed his books on the same desk. He hung his jacket beside the same closet. That night, he went to sleep. At exactly 1:47 a.m., he opened his eyes. Someone was standing outside his bedroom. He couldn't see anyone. There were no footsteps, only slow breathing. Then a woman's voice came from the hallway. "Ethan." The new tenant sat up in confusion. He had never heard that name before. And inside the closet, someone was quietly watching him.